special guest today. I'll introduce her shortly. But just kind of bookkeeping, the next big event in our department is going to be the Festival of Trees. How many of you heard about the Festival of Trees? Okay, most of you know about it. Okay, perfect. So this is the 35th year that we're doing this. It started in 1987, and the trees initially were like 7 feet high. They were really like Christmas trees. And now the trees don't look like trees anymore. Okay? They look more like sculptures. So this year's tree theme is called The Future of Space. Okay? So if you're interested in designing a tree, please reach out to Gabby. Gabby, can you stand up and show your face? Gabby is our student coordinator. So if you're interested in designing a tree, or you're interested in volunteering for the Festival of Trees events, please reach out to her. And from the department, we can also reimburse the materials cost, okay, if you're designing a tree. We hook you up with the manufacturer, and your tree will be showcased along with about 30 other trees designed by famous firms like HKS, HOK, Gensler. All these firms will be there. Usually we have about 500 people in this event, and it's done by our department. So it's a big occasion of pride for us, and a lot of our alumni are going to be there. So it's a great networking opportunity for all of you. And it's a gala event, a lot of good food, drinks. Okay, so hope you can make it. It's on Thursday, now. And if you're interested in buying a ticket, you get a student discount, and our adjunct faculty also get a discount. So,
you have to see Zenaida though to go purchase that.
You have to look for Zenaida in Zena's office if you want.
And you have to present your Panther ID.
And the Panther ID. Yes. All right. So that's about that event. So if you're interested, please let us know. Okay. So today we have a very special guest professor, Upali Nanda. Dr. Nanda is our Paul Sehas eminent scholar and road chair that brings leading designers, critics, builders, and thinkers to FIU, especially to the interior architecture program, to address the most compelling issues facing our discipline today. Dr. Upali Nanda is a principal and global director of research for HKS, an international architectural firm where she spearheads and leads research projects globally. She also teaches as an associate professor of practice at the Taubman School of Architecture and Urban Planning at the University of Michigan, and serves as the executive director for the nonprofit Center for Advanced Design and Research and Education, Center for Advanced Design, Research and Education, called CALTRI. Her award-winning research around health and well-being, neuroscience and architecture, sensitivics, point of decision design, and outcome-driven design has been widely published. She has won several research and innovation awards, including the 2018 Women in Architecture Innovator Award.
All right.
So we're excited to have Upali, and the lecture is titled Help by Design, a Practical Perspective. Upali.
Thank you. For the record, I don't think I got that much applause the first time I got the award. So, how's everyone doing? It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the best time to have a lecture, right? Right. So before I start, is there anything anyone in the audience wants to make sure I cover? Education, okay. Healthcare. It would be a bit of a problem if I didn't cover that, but what else?
After COVID.
After COVID, okay. Right. Think about that, and we'll keep enough time for conversation. If you want to stop me anywhere, we can talk about the questions you have. But a lot of content I might have that I didn't think of presenting, so don't limit your questions to what I present. Okay? But I will share the academic perspective. Newton and I go way back. We went to graduate school in Singapore together. I know, many moons ago. We don't share how many years that was. But we have this shared love and interest in intersections. And the academic perspective is because I'm a practitioner with a foot in academia. And for reasons that I fully don't understand, complicate my life. And this lecture was a great opportunity for me to reflect back on why. Why is it so important for practice, academia, and the nonprofit world to come together? So that's what you'll hear a little bit about. I'll talk about my role at HKS, where I'm the Global Research Director. HKS, as you all know, is a 1,500 plus person firm, 24 offices worldwide. We do have a Miami office. We do have a lot of FIU alumnus. And that office does primarily healthcare and hospitality work. I teach part-time at Taubman. It gives me my fix of speaking to students and working with students when you still think anything can happen in practice. And that perspective is so valuable for someone who is in practice to see what fresh ideas could come up. But it's also valuable to learn as a student what some of the constraints and opportunities are in practice. And then finally, I serve as an executive director for a nonprofit founded by HKS. And I'll share with you why that's also important. So one is pure corporate practice. So the projects we do are big and complex, like the SoFi Stadium, like large healthcare projects that are multi-million-dollar projects with many, many thousands of square feet. At Taubman, I get to teach experimental seminars. And then at Cadre, I get to work on the collaboration and intersection between practice and academia. You put a lot of light on me, Newton.
Oh, sorry.
I'm wondering. Thank you. If they want to sleep, they should have that option, right? It's 3 o'clock. Feel free to nap if I can't capture your attention. Okay, so let's talk about the practice perspective first. When I started and I graduated with my PhD, that was in 2005. And your options for going into practice as a researcher were very limited. You could either go into academia, or you could go in and become a practitioner and do design. So becoming a researcher in practice was a bit of an experiment. And I started in a small art firm doing research on art and health. It's not something that I'm going to speak much about, but it was a period of extreme focus that I only appreciate now in retrospect. At the time, it felt very narrow to me because I had done architecture, I had my degree, I did a PhD in sensory design, and then I focused on something very narrow. But being a researcher in practice was interesting because I had to open all my talks with what do I do and why do I do it? Because the title didn't make sense. Now, almost every big firm and a lot of medium-sized firms and many small firms have design researcher roles within them. So that is a shift that I've seen in my career. So after the talk, if any of you are interested in that career trajectory, let's have a conversation about it. Thank you. In doing or setting up research, it took us a little bit of time to appreciate that true meaningful research happens in partnership. So how we are set up to do research is we do deep dive work, we do applied work, and we do a lot of coalition-based research with a lot of partners. This is what our team looks like. So we have 9 people now. And we have interns, and this year we had our first brain and building interns. So we got cognitive science students to be research interns in a design firm. And it was fascinating because they would get understandings from cocci and try to link the brain and the built environment. And they had to determine what the mechanisms of the brain, how it relates to design, and also see what kind of evidence there is linking the built environment to what happens in our psychology, in our neurology, and in our behavioral sciences. This team that you see, the expertise, you'll see on the side. So for example, Casey Lindbergh is a PhD in experimental psychology with a master's in architecture. Okay? We have Renee Mantooth, who did her bachelor's in interior design and then went on to do a PhD in environmental psychology. So more and more, we are starting to see these bridge professionals who are getting diverse areas of expertise together and putting it in service of design. So very diverse thinkers, public health backgrounds, healthcare backgrounds, experienced design backgrounds. And I am constantly amazed, like when I look at the resumes that come across our desk, I would never get a job today. Like if I applied, I'd be like, You know, it's amazing what your generation is bringing to the professional workplace is pretty incredible. And the opportunities to really bring different disciplines together is also really, really huge. The diverse thinkers are integrated in practice, and this is a distinction that we have started talking about. So for the longest time, we would work through the built environment. And now our mandate has shifted to within, through, and beyond the built environment. So research sits within a sector called innovation. Innovation has sustainability, research, the consulting group, a futures and emerging technologies group, the computational design group. And what we have realized, and we're not the only firm to realize it, is the brief often is flawed. If you are reacting to the brief, the program brief, if somebody is already coming to you and saying, I want a hospital with these many patient rooms, this much diagnostic and treatment, et cetera, where are those assumptions coming from? Those assumptions might come from 30 years ago, before the medical technology field had exploded, right? Same thing with hospitality, same thing with stadiums. With every typology, the world has changed in the social infrastructure, in the technology infrastructure, in so many ways, and the climate context has changed so drastically that those traditional briefs don't apply. So we have found that we have to go really upstream and start the question of why build? What are you actually trying to solve for? And that's where strategy and operations come in. Then you get to climate and sustainability, people and experience, and only then you start getting into design, which is now becoming digital and physical design, because even those two worlds have collided. So it's a time of tremendous change. I find it interesting where people go. So a lot of people from our firm, for example, might be hired as architects to design the metaverse. A lot of technology firms are getting into architecture in a very, very different way. Is anyone familiar with Google's Sidewalk Labs? That might be something to look up, but it was really interesting. Google wanted to get into building cities. The city of Toronto was their prototype project, right? And didn't work out, yeah. And didn't work out exactly how they had planned, but it's just really interesting to see that our profession of architecture and interior design has lots of different players in it right now. And so not surprisingly, we are playing in a lot of different areas right now as well. And we are going more and more upstream to really think about the work in this context of within, through, and beyond the built environment. And this is kind of the model of applied research, R&D, a lot of knowledge development and mentorship. There are 5 cores to the R&D, digital and material technology, climate and carbon, people and society, business and economy, and art and aesthetics. Those are the core research areas. You have a lot of applied areas that you see on the left, and then the coalition-based alliances are the things we do in partnership. So, what anchors our research? For us, and as a majority of interior students, you will appreciate it, we are anchored on the art and the science of being human. So looking at the brain, behavior and culture, neuroscience, psychology, and anthropology is really important, and studying people and their relationships with their environments is really, really important. You'll notice we don't use the term human-centered design. Why do you think that is? Because half of our climate change challenges come from being too human-centered, right? So there's a shift we are seeing. So we are anchored, like we're constrained. Our brains live in our bodies live in our environments. We can never get out of being human. We have to embrace being human, but we can't be centered entirely on just human-centered design. So empathy and evidence are equal measure important to us, and that's part of our structure overall. This anticipation of the slide change is very interesting. The second thing that anchors us is the place-based approach. What do we as a discipline have to give? It's an understanding of being situated. The number of times I've given a talk to an audience that does not have architects in it, I often start the talk with saying, raise your hand if you're nowhere. Because you're always somewhere. There's always a physical context, no matter what your digital world. Your brain lives in a body, your body lives somewhere. But we forget the stage on which the theater of life happens all the time. We take it for granted all the time. Architects and interior designers and urban planners are not on the tables where policy and legislation is being discussed because we take it for granted. Because we adapt to the environment and forget that the environment is never neutral. It actively helps or it actively harms. And that makes a difference. So this place-based approach is important because that's our differentiator. Our research uses qualitative and quantitative approaches that are rooted in geographic, spatial, and cultural contexts. We understand what it means to be somewhere. And in a growingly hybrid world, it's really, really important. Right now, 20% of you are with me. At least 30% of you are wherever your digital phones are taking you. You're definitely checking your phone every minute or so. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But if I asked you, where are you in this room, in this conversation? Not all of us, because it's possible to be in parallel worlds. It's possible to be in parallel worlds. It's possible to be in multiple places cognitively, but you can only be in one place physically. And I want to really reiterate that point because the investigation around that has not even started. And ironically, the people who are investigating it are in the human-computer interaction industry, in HCI, as they are trying to develop metaverses because they want to give you the illusion of presence. And here we are with expertise in what it means to be in an environment, interacting with the environment, not giving it enough attention. I'm belaboring this point because it's really important to embrace the place-based distinction of our inquiry. Newton was saying at breakfast today that most designers have this superpower that they can look at a space and they can see it in section, they can see it in plan. They can see spatial reality in a way that many others can't. Seeing spatial reality and seeing a person's interaction with that spatial reality is really, really important. What you see on the screen is the range of research tools we might do. So focus groups, spatial analytics are using space syntax, field research, ideation, consumer analytics, and something new that we have started doing is just experience prototyping. You prototype spaces, do you prototype experiences? And that's particularly salient for areas like healthcare. Why do all of this? Why do all of the research? It's going to be a prevalent theme, and when we talk about it, data is not enough. There is no dearth of data. You want data, you'll find data. Sadly, you'll find data on anything, proving whatever you think is true to be true. It's a very interesting world around data right now, but why do it? In design, the key objective of doing research is to unlock a new way of thinking, is to find a new way of thinking about something that felt so standard for so long, and you're like, I wouldn't have thought about it this way unless I had done the research. And the design is always at that convergence of the digital and the physical. And in the end, unlocking a new way of thinking is not enough unless it is to achieve desired outcomes. What are you doing it for? What is the outcome? The output is a building. The outcome is health, happiness, lack of stress, lack of anxiety, reduced stress, all of those things. We have a program at HKS that's called the Living Lab program, where we have converted our offices into living labs, and there the outcomes are measured in terms of environmental impact and health impact. And so increasing things like sleep satisfaction, lighting, air quality, acoustics, energy use, not just what's modeled, but what's actual and what it links to in terms of operations. Again, why do what you're doing? The distinction between what you're creating as a deliverable or the output, which is often a representation, and the actual outcome it's for, which is usually for a lived experience, is really important. Any questions on this? Right? All right. So in healthcare in particular, a lot of people here are interested in healthcare. So I'll show you a little bit of what this model looks like in healthcare. What does applied research and research integration look like? Our health research lead is Dr. Deborah Wingler. Dr. Upali Joshi is a senior design researcher who works with her. And part of this model is how research is integrated into healthcare. So you'll see a core. The core research is around building intellectual property. You have research methods at the core. And then it's surrounded by data science, visualization, tool development, scientific literacy, and design thinking. Those two are really important. Scientific literacy is important, but you have to balance it with design thinking. So you want to be comfortable with the science. Then you want to be comfortable going out of the science and saying, what am I going to make with it? And then you want to be comfortable going back into the science and saying, how would I test it? Right? So both of those, the duality of skills is important. How it integrates with practice, I will say this, that in healthcare, one of our biggest success points is we are paid for the research. It is a line item in our projects to do research. And that's a big shift, because for the longest time, we would do it for free as part of good design. And then as it got to contextual inquiry, we would put it as a line item, and we would literally start getting revenue from it. And there are three components: discovery and diagnostics. Every doctor, before they give you a cure, do diagnostics. What is the MRI equivalent of designing a new hospital? How is it that we are designing often for the same operations, the same staff, needing a new space, but we don't do diagnostics? So we have a tool called Design Diagnostics. It's actually published as a peer-reviewed paper too, where the premise is do the diagnostics, figure out what's wrong with the space you currently have, because you don't want to take old operations or old habits or old problems into a new space. So the discovery and diagnostics process is really important. Then it goes into prototyping and testing, which is throughout the design phase, and then measuring impact and outcomes after occupancy. And then finally, the last rung is building coalitions for influence, which is taking, in practice, often you're constrained by going project by project by project, stepping back and thinking about big topics or big investigations in coalitions. So that's kind of the applied research model. How many people here are familiar with evidence-based design as a process? That's like, what is this? Heard about it, but don't know it. Know it really, really well.
Not really, really well, we just learned about it.
Okay. Fantastic. All right. There's a lot to contribute to that because it's relatively new. And I would say that you want to be both evidence-based and evidence-challenging in your approach. So you want to look at the evidence, you want to look at the limitations of the evidence, you want to say, what's the opportunity to grow the evidence, not just follow the evidence, right? That's the shift in thinking that we need. So the biggest achievement, I would say, of Deborah and her team has been to create an integrated model. It's like this constant suspense. Maybe she'll get it, maybe she won't. All right, let's try this. Okay, so these are the 8 steps of an evidence-based design process, right? It starts with organizational readiness and defining what your goals are, goes into pre-design, looking at the relevant evidence, creating concepts, creating a hypothesis, which is very, very important. What do you think is going to happen? Collecting baseline measures, monitoring during construction, then measuring after occupancy. This idea of a hypothesis is critical. Every design decision is a hypothesis. Every design decision is a hypothesis. We are incredibly lucky that nobody calls us out on it. We are like, here are the drawings, beautiful renderings, good luck, world. Someone else will construct it, someone else will operate it, someone else will live in it, but I will get published in my design awards book, which will not have any people in it. How many lived experience awards do we know of in the design industry? Actually, one of the most significant ones is given by the interior design industry, by ASID, which is called the Outcome of Design Award. And we have 2 of those. But it's important that people don't, for some reason, our discipline values the potential more than the actual. And it's amazing. It makes design a lot of fun. It's amazing to be valued for the potential, for the brave new ideas. But there's also value in accountability to the realization of that idea and understanding what happened. So that's a key piece in healthcare because the stakes are so high. You cannot not have accountability to the outcomes. In healthcare, if your design increases fall risk, increases infection risk, increases risk of staying in the hospital longer, it's a human failure, it's a fiscal failure. And you can't afford to do that. So when the stakes get higher, accountability gets higher. So in the EBD process, we do that current state analysis through a design diagnostic. So in the diagnostic, you will actually go and spend time in the field. If I'm designing an ICU, if I'm designing a med-surg unit, I am in the field, not the researcher, the planner. The architect is in the field using tools developed by design researchers to understand the current state in its entirety. They have to go on site, they have to do behavior mapping, they have to follow nurses around and understand the lived experience, what we call the human script that will play out in the stage that you are going to design. So all of these tools, we use something called Fulcrum for behavior mapping now. We still use a lot of shadowing. We are still trying to really get the integrated technology tools. But there are health training modules where if you're a practitioner, you get trained in these basic research methods so you can do a diagnostic on your projects, right? Evidence. Who wakes up in the morning and reads a research paper? Thank you. That's my sample size of 1. Did you know that Google Scholar has an option that if you give it keywords of topics you're interested in, it'll actually send you articles? If you're interested in things, you could actually read in the morning on what is being published in this area, but all of those articles are so dense. How do project teams get time for it? How do you do it? Like, we have a lab and we prototype all the time. It's not full of people because you're busy. These projects are long and complicated and you're busy. So one of the key things we work on is developing these evidence synthesis documents. and creating state-of-the-evidence libraries. So anytime you do a new project, you can go back and say, here's the state of the evidence. What is it telling me? What can I learn from it? And that's been a big tool that the designers are using right now with a lot of success. Design intent documentation. Of all the things that we have put in place, this is what I'm most proud of. Raise your hand if you design without intent. No one, right? You always design with intent. Now, how often is that intent evident to somebody who looks at your drawings? Does it jump up and in every detail you kind of know why you did something? Our representations are not clear on the intent. A key component of our design intent documentation, this is a little difficult to read, but it says this is the design strategy, this is the intended outcome. So for example, it might be around lighting and circadian lighting. That is the strategy. The outcome is to reduce stress. How will you measure it? A, B, and C metrics. You may not have the opportunity to measure all of your hypotheses, but documenting intent has been huge for our designers. It's a very simple thing. Just annotate your drawings. Do it with a sketch. Tell me why you're doing something so I can go back and help you measure whether it really got there or not. The gap between designer's intent and the user's use and the intended outcome can be really big. It can be really, really big, and oftentimes it's because the intent is not articulated in a way that the end user can see it. We'll talk about the ProMedica case example in a minute, but one of the interesting things is going to do we talked about this in the morning too. I don't like calling it a post-occupancy evaluation because there's nothing post about occupancy. It means everybody died and we have no occupants, so it's really just an occupancy evaluation or an impact evaluation. So never use post-occupancy. We do want to do occupancy evaluations, and I'm always surprised that when we do occupancy evaluations, 9 times out of 10, what you've designed is not being operated the way it was intended. Because the design went in as a visual deliverable, it actually needs a functional narrative. If I come back to the theater analogy again, when you set up a play, you don't say, here's the stage, good luck. You have a script. You have an operational program. That's what it looks like in healthcare. So what we have realized is the gap between design intent and measured outcome is often a functional narrative or an experiential narrative of how do you want to have the human experience play out? How do you want nurses to operate? That is why the strategy and operations piece is so important. We don't think about it. We don't think it's in the realm of design. But it is, because you're setting the stage. If this is an auditorium and people don't know that they're supposed to come here and sit and watch lectures, how will it play out? This particular space is very clearly defined in its affordances. Not all of healthcare is like that. So it becomes really, really important to articulate it and then go back and measure it. Beyond the design intent documentation, which again is something researchers train designers to do, there are a lot of spatial analytics. People familiar with the concept of space syntax? Measuring space's relationship to each other. Look it up. A lot of good work in that's happening out of the Bartlett School, but fundamentally it's looking at the affordances of a plan. Visibility, walkability, proximity. What can you really look at in terms of spatial analytics? A lot of those tools for us have now been embedded into Revit, so our designers don't have to shift to do spatial analytics. And then, of course, the last rung is going back and measuring outcomes, doing occupancy evaluations and impact assessments, and what we call a functional performance evaluation. It is not just measuring whether things are broken or working or if something fell off. It's how are you functioning? Are you functioning as intended and getting the outcomes? So here's a case example. These are, again, design thinking toolkits that are also available. So once you have all of that very defined rubric, you're also encouraged to ideate with it. Here is my first study as a design researcher in a big corporate firm. This is the ProMedica Generations Tower. A lot of the tools we developed came from this particular project. And here is the occupancy evaluations. We started designing this project in 2013, and we went back to measure its outcomes in 2021. It was opened in 2020. It's in Toledo, Ohio. And the punchline for this is just the link to user satisfaction in the end. I'm giving up on the pointer, by the way, just so it's official. So tools for research in the diagnostic behavior mapping, shadowing, interviews, focus groups, these are not as important, right? You really need to know that they exist. But tools will change. What's important are the questions. So don't get fixated on the tools. Fixate on the questions. And for us, one of the key questions was nurses waste a lot of their time. Just going from point A to point B seems really simple. Why is a nurse so tired all the time? Why are they walking all the time? That is a spatial problem. Design created environments where people have to walk around all the time because we didn't think about their actual human scripts. I don't have a slide for it, but I'll tell you the story. For us, working with the entire healthcare team on the client side, we bonded over what was called the applesauce moment. What was the applesauce moment? We went in and did this observation. Nurses are famous for being extremely adaptive. So any environment you give them, they adapt to it. So we shadowed, and we found that for one particular event of giving a pill to one particular patient, a nurse could walk up to a mile. Okay? And what was happening? She was going, a patient says, need a nurse. She goes in, says, what do you need? I'm not feeling well, I need medicine. She goes back to the med-surg closet, gets the medicine, comes back, gives it to the patient, I need water, goes back to another place, gets the water, gives him water. He takes the medicine, throws up, goes to another place, gets something to clean him up. Right? She's already gone to 3 places for one pill. And then she comes back and he's still feeling nauseous. And so she goes across half a mile of the unit to get him applesauce. Okay? And gets the applesauce and gives him back, cleans him up, goes to the fresh supply, goes back. All of this for one pill has taken her 15 minutes, and she's walked more than a mile. One event. And when we shared this, people were like, oh, why isn't the applesauce next to the medicine cabinet? And we're like, yeah, why isn't it? And they're like, oh, we can do that. It's like, yeah, nutrition and meds and supplies, maybe they should be co-located. That changed our standards because med, supply, and nutrition were never co-located. It was half a day of discovery, of doing a really simple thing, of knowing your user in their context, not in a user group meeting where you say, tell me what your challenges are. I don't know, I don't get enough money. My life sucks, family problems. It's really tough for users to identify the spatial context of their issues. It's not something we think about, because if you've done your job well, nobody's noticing the environment. So really observing them in their context gives you these insights. And forevermore in that project, when they said something and they were convinced that was the way, we would remind them of the applesauce moment, because it was such a tiny thing that made such a big difference. And now you can see that in terms of the simulation. So we took that, we converted all of our scripts of observing what nurses were doing today. Then we said, okay, is this optimal? No. What's the optimal sequence? Let's create an optimal sequence. Then let's simulate that optimal sequence on all of our plans. And then design. So we had multiple options, and we predicted using parametric tools that even though you would have a bigger floor plate, you would reduce walking distance by 55%, totally based on space optimization. And after occupancy, when we went on site, we didn't get to 55%, but we got to 43%. of saved time. And that translates to revenue, it translates to nurse burnout, and a lot of different outcomes. A very simple story. But how much of a difference can you make by deeply engaging? I didn't keep my own promise. Okay. And then overall, you can look at this outcomes. We measured overall compared to baseline in the old hospital. Where was there improvement? Where were there lack of improvements? And how did we do in different key units overall? So you can see this increase in satisfaction, increase in cleanliness. And again, healthcare is interesting because a lot of these scores impact their reimbursables directly. So the hospital gets more money when they do better. This is the piece that as students I really want you to focus on, is anytime you have a design intent, you say, this is my intent, this is my outcome. Was I effective? Did I make no change? Was it a challenge, or do I not know? Why is it a challenge? Is it a challenge because of design? Is it a challenge because of operations? And then where is the evidence coming from? This rubric takes a lot of time. Intent, outcome, test, success, not success, why, design problem, operational problem, and where is the evidence coming from? And if you build it, then maybe someday we get close to intelligence that can feed into an AI engine. But we are nowhere close to it today. Because we, as a profession, have not been asked to measure the outcomes of our designs. I was telling Newton this morning that I have not seen a single RFP that says, hey, show me over the last 10 years how you have improved your design. Show me what you did 10 years ago and then what you're doing today, and what is the improvement and why do you call it an improvement? If the world doesn't hold us accountable, we are good to go. We can still get the awards we need. Right? So think about that in terms of the accountability overall. And then this is another great example, very relevant to interiors. One of the things that architecture is also getting into is prototyping new interior architecture environments. So this is more on the innovation side of creating pods for emergency departments. And this is now patented and is under production with a manufacturing partner. Right? So thinking about like big hospitals, lots of things to consider, but you can have certain elements within each hospital that you can prototype to scale and put in lots of different sites. So 2 scales of opportunity, particularly for interiors. Okay, so this is kind of the healthcare story overall. And this is our mantra: better design, better outcomes, better research, better design. It isn't that complicated. You do research to do better design, you do better design so you can get to better outcomes. And for health, the outcome is health and care. Those are the 2 things that we're really interested in. This is a sneak preview of something that we're doing right now, which is around brain health. And that's our evolution of thinking about not just physical health, but mental health and brain health, and getting to exhibits. Because we've struggled for so long on getting research accessible to design, that we said, maybe it's a design project. So there was a whole research report that happened that is now an exhibit for brain health and brain healthy workplaces. So that's been really interesting to see too. Okay. The other 2 chapters of my life I'll be very quick on. So this is practice. This is where I spend most of my time. What you saw was the work from our healthcare team. We'll take questions on that in a second. In academia, based on what my experience in practice has been, I teach an experimental studio called Health by Design. And it only focuses on 2 things: linking design to outcomes across a design continuum. Because the biggest challenge I've observed in practice is urban planners don't talk to architects, architects don't talk to interiors, interiors doesn't talk to medical planning. You have all these people working on design in disparate ways. It makes no sense because the user doesn't step in and say, oh, look, I'm in an interior environment. Now I'm outside, now I'm here. Your lived experience goes across the design continuum, across scales all the time. But our profession has created these silos that experimental studios often give us the opportunity to experiment with. So what we are doing is really getting this idea of health by design and making it an open source classroom. So every year, the student body takes up a challenge. So clinic design was called Care by Design. We do brain health, safety, mental health, and a lot of healthy decision making by design, which we call the point of decision design. Again, two areas on the top, you see the design continuum. So designing information, product, interior, architecture, urban realm, or policy. Whatever the outcome you're interested in, figure out where on the design continuum you can make an intervention or a change, and then learn how to link your strategy to an outcome. So what you're seeing here are outcomes like stress, social bonds, cognitive stimulation, et cetera, et cetera. I am most excited about the fact that we are building a community. You can't do that often in practice. In practice, you have NDAs, you have IP that you have to protect. But in academia, you can really have an open source. So there's a YouTube channel, there is a website, but most importantly, there's a community of people. And every time we get a new batch of students, they have to go back and see what the old batch did to build on it, to have what we call intellectual sustainability. And so the real interest is, can we become a community? Because a lot of the waste that happens in the profession is because we don't have a common rubric. We don't even commonly believe that design can affect outcomes. We can't even sit on a table with confidence and say, design affects outcomes. This is how. This is how we can help. It doesn't directly get you to the outcome, but it actively contributes. And unless you can articulate that, it becomes really difficult. And there are just three simple things. So if you want to see all the projects, go to the website, the Health by Design website. Everything is online. And again, linking design to outcomes across the design continuum through a strong health by design community that challenges disciplinary arrogance. We get students from public health, we get students from human-computer interaction, from social work. But one of the first things we do is to be in this class, stop thinking your discipline has the key to solving the world's problems. And stop thinking another discipline doesn't. Do not use jargon that others can't understand. This idea of disciplinary arrogance, living as a pracademic, has become really, really important to me. A lot of times, why we can't get to sustainability change or true climate action is people don't understand the words. A lot of times, why we can't get to diversity and equity and inclusion outcomes is people don't understand the words. We are inclusive in our thinking, but not in our action. So this is a very key component of why I spend time in academia. It's with the sole purpose of building community that believes we can do things together across disciplines. And finally, I'll end with why we have a nonprofit. Very simple mission. Design, research, and evaluation where all people have access to health and well-being. Pathways to help in health and well-being. That's the mission of the Center for Advanced Design Research and Evaluation. Everything is openly shared, so it's an open source platform to create coalitions. And our favorite example, and Sam, you might have seen this from the ANFA work. So there are reports and guides. Again, if you go on the website, you'll get access to all of these resources. Nobody reads anymore. Nobody reads anymore. There's too much information. So what we, right? So what we really want is to create coalitions, and I'll end with this example. It's my favorite example of what a coalition might look like. HKS was contracted to build a new live-learn college community in UC San Diego. In the RFP, the client put a research requirement where the team doing the design had to come back and measure outcomes. First change, client was visionary. Second change that happened was HKS looked at that and said, we don't have enough money to do a meaningful investigation. Why don't we take that and give it back to the faculty and students in the university, which is what we did through the nonprofit. So UC San Diego faculty and UC San Diego students became the researchers of this project that they were going to live in. And the provost has this wonderful quote, "The new Six College is a living lab that uses architecture to augment positive behaviors and outcomes and integrates that understanding into current academics and future capital planning." Three things happened. New courses were developed. The sustainability innovation in the project became part of a sustainability course. There was a neuroscience and architecture course that was happening on campus. They took some of our hypotheses to test them, and we built a relationship with the living community through scholars who lived on site and gave us constant feedback. And the feedback was about the smallest of things. Your blinds are too transparent. They don't give us enough privacy. Such a tiny little thing, so easily fixed, but we would never have gotten back if you didn't have it from the students on campus. From a big perspective, our data showed that after moving into the new campus, even though it was during COVID, there was an 8.2% reduction in self-reported depression. This has now been published in a journal, and that's pretty huge. We can no longer say the environment doesn't matter. Was it the sole contributor? No. Was it a valuable contributor? Yes. You also saw increase in satisfaction to healthy food, and a lot of decisions around making the healthy choice the easy choice. I won't go into the methodology in the interest of time, but all of this again is in the open source report. And this entire idea of at every point, you're looking at making the healthy choice the easy choice. Healthy amenities are easy to get to. Car parking is hidden so that you walk and bike. Food choices are carefully curated. Socialization is really, really easy to do, whether you want to do it in groups of 2 or 4 or 6. And for each of these design strategies, there was a measure after occupancy. And this data that you see here, it came out of a year's data of scholars who live on that campus collecting it. When you think about it, it's not that expensive to do. All university campuses should be living labs. It was really easy to do, but it was the first time we had done something like that. And then this is the final impact report at the end in terms of human outcomes, environmental outcomes, and fiscal outcomes. And then again, going back to that same rubric that I was showing you, what did you do? Design strategies on top, neighborhood scale, building scale, interior scale. What were the expected outcomes? Did you succeed? Not always. And what were the strategies you used towards those? In the end, I always show this chart. There's a lot of data, but the difference is in the lived experience. The data doesn't connect with people, the stories do. And in the end, whenever we tell the story of this project, I love showing that large windows. Large windows were designed for daylight and environmental sustainability. They became a social justice instrument for the students because during COVID, that is how students expressed to the larger community what they really wanted. One intended outcome and a separate outcome was received by the same strategy. So much learning from that. And so when you talk about research, the academic perspective is data is less important than the delta. What's the difference you're trying to make? How are you going to get there? And I'll end with this idea that the problems of our times not only cannot, but they should not be solved by single individuals or institutions. This is the era of coalitions, and I hope that we can find ways, creative ways, of working together. So with that, let's take questions and not try to work with this clicker anymore. And for those of you who took a nap, I hope it was a good one. Yes.
What would be your top suggestions for healthcare in terms of I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it? You know, ways that things have been done in the past, and then better ways to do it that you found based on the evidence. Do you know what I'm asking?
If you're asking for evolution in standards, like standardized ways of doing it, I would be cautionary about that. I would say the diagnostics are important to do in the context. So a lot of people would say, now we know how to design an ideal patient room. There's a lot of evidence on patient rooms. But what kind of patient? What is the specific kind of context for that particular region that that population is coming from? So standards, even evidence-based guideline standards, are a starting point. They are not an ending point for design. They give you a higher baseline. But you don't stop there. You still do your diagnostics. You still do the contextual discovery. And the evidence is a part of the contextual discovery. It's not the entirety of it. So it's really important. Why I stress the place-based approach is you can't take evidence from a hospital in Sweden and translate it to a rural hospital in Florida. It doesn't work. So you take what it's learned, you understand why it worked, and then you contextualize it with your own discovery, and then create a design.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah. I'm very, very careful about saying we know exactly what the prototypes are, but prototyping is a good process. Start with a higher baseline, but don't take it as the standard.
It's a lot of was unexpansive knowledge, the two fields of neuroscience and architecture. I was wondering what advice you'd have for people in the field of architecture generally, getting into research, and how, since it can be very dense, research papers and not just other experiments and findings, like what advice would you say to those people who can look into it?
I think three things again. Like one, spend more time framing the question. We really need the art of framing questions well. Second, go to someone who has domain expertise. You can't become an expert in neuroscience overnight. But finding someone who has a cognitive science background as a partner in that endeavor can really help. So you have a clean question, you have a partner, and then you can learn and build that translational discipline. It takes a lot of time to become an expert in something. And I don't think we need to. I think we need expert partnerships, not everybody becoming an expert in everything. But people love translational work, so it's easy to find those partners.
I know there's a lot of parallels in what you do and what happens in the tech world. And in tech, it's different because you're creating and prototyping things that are not physically built. The time frames are different. And I also know in tech, a lot of the generalized complaints about that profession is that research is often the first to get cut in terms of jobs because of what needs to happen and where can we cut, and that happens there. So what do you see as, it seems like from what you're saying, and I remember the time period you're talking about where these jobs didn't exist, what do you see as the buy-in to the relevance of research and the job prospects? And do you always feel like research is still like at the top of the cutting off post if they need to cut back on resources?
How many people here are even considering a research-based pathway? Okay, so talk to me afterwards if this sounds like a depressing answer. We'll have another conversation about it. I think it really depends on the relevance. So we always start with impact, saying if you don't do this, then this outcome gets affected. If you're able to make that case, it doesn't get the first to get cut off. We have had a relatively sustainable team for a while now. But it is a problem because the profession is extremely comfortable repeating mistakes. Repeating mistakes. Like, it's very surprising to me that we are very comfortable. I made a mistake in this project. All right, not the same client. I'll make the same mistake in another project. Right? Like, it's just really interesting. You could never do it in tech.
Right.
If 1.20 has an issue, you never repeat it in 2.0. You never repeat it in 3.0. So system clients, you'll see, have a lot of investment in it. Healthcare systems invest in research because they can't afford to repeat errors, whereas service industries don't have the same amount of investment because they're not accountable to the same outcomes. So it's a business model problem in some ways, but we've learned that to keep it sustainable, make your value proposition very clear.
First of all, I want to say thank you for being here. It was an amazing presentation. I am not with you in that this is just only have to be for healthcare. I believe that this has to be for like implementing for
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And every time.
Absolutely. So my role is over every typology. So the living labs are workplace. The brain healthy workplace is workplace. We do a lot more in workplace. The last example was education. So that happens in education. The reason why in healthcare, it's easier because the stakes are high.
Exactly, that's my question. How we can educate, and I can talk about this because I'm an architect and interior architect too. How we can educate all these people in the field that they believe that what they are creating are beautiful sculptures and they are not thinking about the people inside the building, about the environment and all that stuff. I love the fact that you said that this is a collision, that it has to be something together, that is something that the timing is not the same, every day change, and the environments change too.
Yep.
So how we can explain the people in the profession that, because I know that there is a lot of politics involved.
Everywhere. Everywhere. I'm curious if anybody else in the audience has a response to that question. Do people think overall that research is an important component of design? Yes. Do you get to do enough research when you design? No. Is there enough training? No. So I think part of that is right here in the curricular structure, in the foundation, right?
We are trying to do
right?
It depends, no?
Right?
It depends on like the person itself if they want to be able to.
Yes, it also depends a lot on the person, which gets to the issue of foundations. Should it depend? Or should it really be the way in which we say design is done? Right? Should it be foundational? We don't doubt structures. Everybody needs to learn structures. Why doesn't everybody need to learn one-on-one psychology? You're designing for people all the time. So these are questions for you, right?
We might need to have like a class like that.
See? I'm making the best kind of trouble. So that's one. But the second...
But you know what is happening here? That here is the people that is the interior architects, interior designers. Where are the architects that think that they know how to do what are doing?
That is a bigger conversation over wine. That's a conversation over wine. That is a debate, but that also gets to the disciplinary arrogance that I was talking about, right? That's a bigger debate. But I will say that the biggest issue it doesn't happen is we are very comfortable talking to ourselves. Yeah. Design professionals talk to other design professionals, and the rest of the world is like, oh, built environment, why would you be in this conversation? We have to stop talking to ourselves. Whatever our internal issues might be, we have to be in the mayor's office, we have to be in corporate clients' offices, we have to be in people who have the money and are making policy decisions, are making investment decisions to say the built environment matters. Last week, we were at the UN General Assembly, and we spoke about brain new deals and about brain health. And there was an entire panel that had not talked about the built environment. And we were able to say, hey, in this conversation, the built environment matters too. Can we put that in? So it's multi-pronged. Like you start where you have agency, which is in college and curricular structure. You talk to people outside the industry, please. Like, pretty please. We can do so much, and no one sees it. The fees that our profession gets is extremely negligible compared to someone who's designing an app. Right? Like, you're like, what is happening? If the world ended tomorrow, you would still need shelter. This matters, but over time, we have allowed us to get commoditized because we haven't made that case. And we've been too busy talking to ourselves, and that really might be where I end and let people loose, but we can have the conversation about architects and interior designers at length. Yeah? I wanted to make sure if people need to leave, they can go. And I don't want to be, but I am available so we can have a smaller group conversation.
My professor is here, so I'm not worried about it.
Oh, professor is here. I'm sorry, Sam. Yes.
My question is, from your experience and your research, probably. So my group this semester, we're doing healthcare. And when I was doing research about floor plans on emergency departments, I found out that double pavilion plan, which is the most used right now, because of the easy access, like see all the rooms, like in front and back. However, do you think that's efficient when it comes to like travel time for a nurse? I did a little informal interview to a nurse when I went to the emergency room, and she told me like, I mean, it's just like they were like running from here, there, running, like there was always in constant moving. But however, like their like stations, they were not like that used that much. Like, do you think there is another one or like a more effective in that way?
So I won't give you your design solution.
No, right.
But I love that you're asking the question.
Yeah.
And the answer is, if you look at the evidence, if you just go to the Center for Health Design's website and you look at the resources they have on emergency room, there's a lot that has really questioned the centralized nurse model and worked for decentralized nursing stations, but emergency rooms operate differently from inpatient. And so nurse walking is not the key consideration because they're tighter, right? So really what you're looking for in EDs is response time. And usually in a typical emergency visit, you might meet as many as 7 to 10 professionals. The person who checks you in, then the person who takes you in. So think of the operational model of the ED, look at the evidence base that's there, and spend time, if you can, going to a local emergency department and observing. Even if you sit there, like I did an observation years ago, and I remember that from the time that a patient came to the waiting room to the time that the first doctor or somebody who can help them got to them, they had had 10 interactions. And not a single person was actually able to help them with the problem that they had. That's an operational issue, but distance won't solve that. What it does become is, what does the patient do in the waiting area? What do they do in the exam area? Are they a level 5 patient or a level 1 patient? So it's complex. You can't find a solution from the evidence that will work for the challenge clearly. But you take the evidence, like the first slide I showed was evidence plus empathy. Get the evidence and say, here are the options, here are the pros and cons. Then do the empathy exercise and say, what do they really need? And then come upon your solution, which you have the advantage in academia to be disruptive. You don't have to follow the evidence. You can challenge it. But you have to know it. You can't challenge something you don't know. So know it, challenge it, and then you can really advance the knowledge rather than following the knowledge.
Any other questions? Just one question on behalf of students. Again, the question I asked for every typology. Is there a particular skill to be learned for a student who's aspiring to get into healthcare?
Did you ask this for every typology or healthcare?
So I asked for people in hospitality, in workplace. Is there something that distinguishes
to get into health? I think it's the outcome-driven component of it, that the outcomes, the stake is so high. I would say that healthcare is begging for hospitality and workplace thinking in particular. It's begging for it. So they should bring their domain expertise to the problem by all means, but understand that the stakes are higher. So safety is first. Safety is non-negotiable. Efficiency is next. And experience is really, really important, but not at the cost of safety, ever, right? And that's for any typology, but in health, it's just more complex, but it is starving for non-healthcare insight. And we've made it so complicated that we've not made room for that to happen. But if you can, and if you can bring your hospitality and workplace hat to healthcare, healthcare is the most complex workplace that's out there, with workers who are always in the move and have the highest level of burnout right now. So it's a beautiful challenge if you've actually thought about, I think you did experience design. It's an experience design problem. And Deborah Wingler, who I spoke about as the healthcare lead, one of the things she does for clients and big system clients is actually experience strategy. So in our healthcare projects now, there's an operational strategy, there's an experience strategy, and only then is there a design strategy for the physical environment. So you have to map the experience, you have to map the operations, and only then get to the physical and digital design components of it.
Sorry, can you repeat that again, like the steps before the design strategy?
So experience strategy, like what's the experience that you want overall, which is about the journey model and how somebody gets through it. Still very outcome driven, but you think about the experience strategy, you think about the operational strategy. Like how are you going to operate? What is the operational model? What does the nurse actually need to do? What does the doctor do? What does the resident do? You have all these stakeholders in healthcare. What do each of them do? How do they operate together towards a specific outcome that is usually a patient outcome? And only then get to the design. Don't start with the design, because design is an output towards an outcome. If you start with the brief that already has been written, you're never going to move the needle. Sure.
With that positive note,
you are going to move the needle. Aww. Thank you. Thank you.